FirePro modding. This one's going to be about the exploding cage. We are going to get into things like this one will matter where we patch, so we're going to explore patch locations or injection locations in a little more detail. We are going to use a timer to make something occur slightly after it would in FirePro, because we can't necessarily, well, for a long time we couldn't edit the animations, and I still don't have, I guess I could put flags for it, but I haven't. So we're going to need to explore using timers to delay animations. We are going to explore what to do if you've patched something and it's going to affect, or if something has been patched so it will affect the way that you want your mod to play out, and what to do in that case. And we will look a little bit into adding a form that has some user options that can be checked off, although I may just get the basic functionality up and running in this tutorial, and then we will double back to it in tutorial 3 and talk about how to add user options and forms and all of that stuff. So without further ado, I have my this here, switch to code view. This here is my template project. I'm going to start up a new one just to reinforce the how to start a project. So we're going to call this .NET Framework. It should be over here now since you've used it. If you haven't done the first tutorial yet, I recommend that you do. But if not, you just start a class library .NET Framework. We'll call this Cage Explosions, or Explosion. .NET Framework 2.0, always .NET Framework 2.0. Create. Then, of course, first things first, we got to add our references. We're going to add the same references we did last time. So we want system.windows.forms. And then you come down here to Browse. And you browse. And you go to your managed directory. That's in your FirePro Wrestling World, FirePro Wrestling W_data managed. And we're going to add assembly.c or assembly or -c#.dll. We are going to add modpack.dll. We are going to add pwgrframework.dll. And we are going to add unityengine.dll. And then we just hit add. And we should have 4 there and 1 in the assemblies. We hit OK, and they should all show up over here. And we've got them all, so we're good. And then we'll set up our usings real quick. Using DG, using modpack, and using Unity Engine. I think the Unity Engine one will be new. We're going to need that in this particular thing. Anytime you want to use Unity Engine classes, you're going to need that one. We're going to be using several of them, mostly for the positioning. So we're going to need things like Vector 3 and that sort of thing. So Unity Engine, and then I don't think we need using system.windows.forms in this one, but I'm going to throw it up there just in case. And so there we go, we're good there. And then I am going to rename this class to be Exploding Cage, and then yes, and there we go. So you should have a project window that looks similar to this. Namespace Cage Explosion, public class Exploding Cage, where you've got the usings of DG, modpack, Unity Engine, and system.windows.forms added in. And now we can get to the actual programming. So we know we're going to want to make the cage explode. So we go public static, because remember, the patcher requires anything you're going to patch into the game to be public and static. And this would be a void. It doesn't need to return anything. And we'll call it make cage explode. So we know that we want to make the cage explode, and I'm going to check my thing over here just to be sure that I'm not missing anything. I am not missing anything. So we know we're going to want the cage to explode, and we know that we want the cage to explode when the player does the crazy the Irish whip, where they instead of like whipping them to the ropes, they pick them up and throw them into the cage head first, and then they fall over and it makes the cage noise. So we know that that's what we're looking for. We know that we want the cage to explode at that point. So we'd have to use our ILSpy tool to figure out where that happens. Because that's where we're going to need to patch in, and it also is going to tell us some information about what class we have to patch, that sort of thing. So we're going to go and find so this right here, the player, let me see if I can find it, player, right here. This is a wrestler in a match. They're called players. Edit wrestler data and preset wrestler data are like the actual data for the wrestler, but this is like the wrestler in action. So everything is going to be every instance of a wrestler in a match is a player class that has had the data transferred from either the preset wrestler or the edit wrestler to it. I punched the mic. I'm sorry about that. So we're going to need to check in player, because that's presumably, like, this tells the game, this is going to happen, so get this animation. And we know, because it's not a selectable move, anything that is not a selectable move is a basic animation. And any basic animation is usually triggered through the player class. So that's a great place to start if you know that you're looking for a something that happens on a basic animation. So we're going to go down, and we know it's an Irish whip. So let's see, there's all kinds of things in here, like process grapple, process key press, process hammer throw, which might be a good place to look. But I'll just, so yeah, we've got standard key inputs, we've got update players, there's lots of places where you might want to try to look. That's the thing with these, is nobody gets great at knowing where everything is without doing it. I know where most stuff is at this point, but I've also been writing these mods for 3 years now. So I have 3 years of experience working with this code base on a very regular basis. So don't feel bad if you have trouble finding something. Feel free to ask in the mod programming channel on the ModPack Discord, which was linked in the first video. I may just link it in every video, just to be helpful. But if I forget to do that, it's in the first tutorial video in the description. But feel free to ask in there. One of us who does the programming, me or View, usually, will probably be able to answer that question that you have about where to find something, or give you some tips about where you might want to try to look if we don't know exactly. So, but I noticed that there is a process hammer throw in this in the player class, so we're going to check there, since we know that we want the cage to explode on the one animation that happens based on a hammer throw. So we're going to look here, and I noticed that I wrote a thing, the cage causes blood, from the arena texture database. It has that check in there that cage always causes blood for things like when you use a barbed wire cage texture. And that's actually going to be the exact same place that we need to hook for our code. So that won't always happen, that you've written something that ends up in the exact same place. But let's just go down here and see how I figured that out. I mean, you're looking down and you're looking down, and you get to a point where it says if venue setting.ringkind equals ringkind.cage. Well, that's a pretty good indication that the ring is a cage. So we look here and we notice that they're requesting the basic animation pound to fence. Well, that is the basic animation where they throw them head first or face first into the cage. So that You there? Okay, yeah, my mic was doing weird stuff. I apologize again. Not super professional. This is not, I'm not a YouTube streamer where I plan to make a job out of this. So, but yeah, so we notice that they're requesting that basic animation, which it literally is the throw to the fence. So we found it. Now we just need to figure out where to patch. So, Reflexel, mine is already open. It will change automatically. The Reflexel instructions down here will change automatically when you go through each method. So we basically are already where we need to be. It's already open. But if yours wasn't, like you just loaded ILSpy because you had closed it, you just click Reflexel once you're into the method you want, and it will bring up a thing. So what we are going to need to find is that so when you see these, an enum, anything that's an enum, like the basic skills, they're going to be numbered. You'll notice that it says basic skill enum hammer throw to runway, or let's see, where's that? Pound defense is what we're looking for. Yeah, basic skill enum pound defense _D, which is the down direction, and then it modifies that based on the player direction there in the code. But that's actually number 1052. So we can look for 1052 in the code, and that's probably going to be the biggest tip-off, is that it will have a 1052 over here. Or we can look for the call to request basic skill or request basic animation. But you'll notice if you look at the code, there are several other calls to that. And so you may not want to rely on that one because there's bunches of it in the code and you might end up with the wrong one. But since we definitely have an easy thing with the number 1052, I doubt there's going to be many other calls to 1052 in the code. So we're just going to look down, and here we see 1052. And it pushes the supplied value of the type int32 onto the stack as an int32. So this is basically saying create an integer of the value 1052. And an enum in C# is just a fancy integer. So that's actually what you're looking for. And then you're adding something to it. This is loading location 3. I could get fancy and tell you what location 3 means if you click over here to variables and all that other stuff, but I'm not going to. It's not important. 1052 is right where we need it. And then we're going to go down from there until we find the next call to request basic skill animation, because that is where we want it. So that's right here, 125. So we're looking at 125, and here's where you use after. Do you see how this is in an if statement? So if we did before the next, if we went to 126 and said before, it would actually load it in between these two ifs. It would load it, and it would break because this is an else if. So we do not want that at all. That will not work. It will cause an error. So we need it to load in these particular brackets. So we're going to have to do it after the call to the request skill animation. So that one is going to be 125 after. And if you look at my processing code, you've got injection location 125, inject direction after. And so that's where you really use that after inject direction. Because if you need to put something into like an if statement, you can't use before unless you're using before in the middle of a block of code that is in that if statement. So, if it's at the end of the if statement, you can't use before, you have to use after and use the line that the last code of the if statement is on. So now that we know that, we are going to go ahead and write our hook for this method. Before we do anything else, we're going to write our hook. You don't have to. If I know where I'm going to hook, like if I had to figure it out because, just to see what I needed to do, or because I was poking around, I'll go ahead and write the hook right then and right there. So we got target class equals, and we were in the player class. We got target method equals, and I do not remember what that method is called. I think it's process hammer throw, but it's hammer through because they can't spell in English. So we're gonna copy that, and that's why I always recommend just coming back and copying. Because if you just did process hammer throw like you're thinking, you're going to get an error. Your code will compile and it will look like it's working fine, but when you go to patch it in, it will throw an error telling you to contact Mike because the method that you're trying to patch to doesn't exist, and and you don't want that. So now we've got inject location, and we said 120 equals 125. We've got inject direction equals after. We've got inject flags equals, and right now we don't have any, so we're going to do none. We may end up modifying that later if we discover we need the instance or a variable from the code before line 125 or something like that. So we're going to say none for now, but keep in mind that that is up in the air. When you first write a hook, you may end up needing it, or needing to modify it, and we'll call the group exploding cage. Okay, so there's our hook. That was pretty painless. I know that when I'm going through how to find your location and everything, it might seem complicated or rough, but I promise you it gets easier. And so now we know we want the cage to explode. So now our next thing is, how do we make the cage explode? Well, we know that if somebody gets hit into the barbed wire ropes, they will explode. So why don't we go try to find that? So we're looking for maybe because the ring kind was cage, when it was cage, maybe we should be looking for maybe ring kind barbed wire or wire ropes or something along those lines. So let's keep looking through here just to see if maybe there's anything that could help us out there. And here we have ring kind dot equals ring kind dot barbed wire. Well, that's a pretty good indication that there is a ring kind dot barbed wire, but if you look here, it's not actually calling anything that looks like it would make the ring explode or the ropes explode. So it gave us an idea of what to look for, but it doesn't have anything useful here. So let's keep looking around in the player thing, because we know that it happens when a player hits the ropes. So let's see if there's anything that might that seems to us like it would trigger when the player hits something. Process grapple, process recovery, process rope escape, process special run, process running collision. So here we go. Player hits the ropes, and that is what happens, when you hit the ropes. So let's see. And here we go. We got venue kind.ring kind.barbed wire. So here we go, and you have match effect.inst play rope explosion, and then it needs a vector 3 position, it looks like. So it looks like we have what we need there, and then this next one, if we keep reading the code down, looks like the sound effects is not included in the explosion because they have a separate call to play match sound effect. So, when you find stuff like this, don't be afraid to just straight cut and copy, there's really no reason not to. If you feel like that is going to help you out, then go ahead and do it. And so here's another thing that I like to do. I absolutely hate these global things. So usually what I'll do after I cut and copy code is I'll go ahead and highlight it all, hit Control H and type in global and then the two thingies, and I'll just get rid of that because this is search and find and replace when you hit Control H. So leave an empty thing here, but always make sure that your code is highlighted and that this is on selection, and just hit replace all and it'll replace all the instances where it had that global thing. I don't know why, but it bugs me to death to have that global there because it's totally unnecessary and it just clutters up your code. So this is another thing that you're going to need to do when you cut and paste code. Sometimes it will have a this, and since we grabbed it from the player class, that means that whatever player instance is being referred to is what this should mean. And that is if you see a this, that means that you need to pass your local, or what is it, the invoking instance in your flag. So we know right off the bat, since we have this in that code, we're going to have to come up here and select pass invoking instance at the very least. So like I said, we modified our flags now. So what we're going to need to do there is when we pass the invoking instance, we need to pass in the class that we are patching, which is player, and then we just need to give that a name. I always call my players PL object generally, and then if I need another one, it'll be PL object 2, PL object 3. And so what you want to do after you have added the argument in and changed your flag, when you see that there is a this in there, go ahead and highlight it again, hit the Control H, and we'll change this dot into whatever you called. I'm pointing at the screen like you can fucking see it. Good job, Carl. So what we want is to change this dot to the name of the argument that you just added. So in this case, it's going to be PLOBJ dot. And you don't need the dots. I always do the dots because it makes it simple for me. But yeah, you could have just done this and PL object because the dots were already there. Okay, so there we go. We have it changed now. And this will trigger a rope explosion when someone is thrown into the ropes, or thrown into the cage. That is literally all you need to do to make this work. But let's see what happens when we run it, because this particular thing will not do what you think it's going to do. I can tell you that from experience. So we're going to go ahead and build our mod, because we're pretty much, we've done everything that we think we need to do in this case. So we're going to go to cage explosion and bin, and we'll go to debug. Yeah, debug. What am I doing? Debug. And now we find our cage explosion.dll. We grab it, and we go into managed, and we're going to paste it in there. And I am going to get rid of Hello Fire Pro World because we don't want those popping up on us, do we? That was just for the very first tutorial. We don't need them. They don't do anything interesting. So now we're going to go ahead and click that. We're going to click on the exploding cage, make sure they're both checked off, and patch Fire Pro World. There we go. So I usually, after I patch, I will refresh in ILSpy if I have it open, and I will go down to wherever I was. This was process hammer through, and I will make sure that it patched in correctly. So we patched it in right here. Yeah. So we've got the cage causes blood, and now we've got the exploding cage, make cage explode. So we have passed it in. It takes the player object, which is this, which is why you saw all those weird thises in the thingy. It's just talking about whatever player object is there. And yeah, so there we go. So now the cage should explode when that animation is triggered. But you'll see that it doesn't do what you think it's going to do. And then I will talk about why that is and how to modify that. And if you wanted to, to guess, I will let you guess, and you can, I don't know, put it in the comments or whatever, what your guess was. Or you can just wait till I tell you, I don't care. But yeah, if you want to take a wild guess before I tell you and throw it in the comments for something, then that's cool. Or what you think is going to happen before you see it here in a second. So we're going to go to online or offline mode, exhibition. We want the cage match, or cage match plus. I'm going to set it to be 1 player, and I am just going to pick somebody. It doesn't even matter. I don't know why I didn't just pick the top guy. There we go. And I always test against Luther Wright. I have no idea why. He's just my punching bag. So, and I'm going to get a pop-up window asking me which entrance outfit, because I didn't turn any of that off. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I've just gotten used to it being there. So what we're going to want to do, I'm going to turn that down to comm level 1 so that they don't put up much of a fight. I'm going to come down here. Oh. Come on now. I don't know why he is not throwing. Is my controller? It's plugged in. It's reacting. Ah, it's error right now. I'm getting an invalid IL code. Well, that's weird. This did not happen in the... This did not happen in the test run. So obviously we fucked something up. This happens a lot. That was not actually what I wanted to show you, but now we have to figure out why we're getting an invalid IL code. Because technically everything looks like it should work fine. Did we hook anything else in this? There it is. No, that doesn't look... Oh, yep. Yeah, because we split up... See, when we patched that new thing in, we split up another thing. That is usually what happens when you run multiple DLLs and we don't all work together. So, the only way to fix this, generally, is to talk to the person whose mod you're conflicting with and see if you could come up with a solution. So, yeah. In the meantime, to make this work... Oh man, this is a hard one. I should have thought about this beforehand. Let's see, what can I turn off? I guess in order to make this work, I'm going to have to temporarily disable the... let's see here, the arena texture database real quick, and then at that point it should be correct. Let's see. Yeah, now we got make cage explode, and if we come down here to the one that was being... No, it's still... Well, let's see if that works. I don't think that that's going to. I don't know why it's being such a pain in the butt. Or you know what we might be able to do? I think we can fix this by doing this. We are going to rename the DLL. This can help too. We're going to let the mod pack load first. So in order to do this, you go Properties, and what you want is the assembly name, and you just want to change it to something that they load in alphabetical order. So we want something that comes after mod pack. So we'll do z cage explode, and then save, and then build. And yeah, you're gonna run into weird stuff like this when you're modding. And so, well, I was totally not expecting this. It wasn't the worst thing to run into, especially if something like this fixes it, because this was an easy thing to do, and it may fix the problem. So let's do that. We'll go down here and go to FirePro Managed, paste it in. We'll get rid of the regular cage explosion. We'll go back to the FirePro directory. We'll patch it in. We'll go patch FirePro World. Oh crap, I forgot to turn it on. I'm a dumbass. Got to enable the new DLL, and that's already checked because it was part of the last one and it's based on name. So we'll go ahead and do that. Now if we go back here, let's see what happens. Okay, we've got the make cage explode. And see, now this is not messed up anymore. That's what happens sometimes when you have a mod that loads before the mod pack. It can throw off all of the mod pack's injection pointers. So I tend to recommend that people avoid that. Start your mod with the name Z or something. Z, whatever you want it to do. That way it loads after the mod pack. You could even call it N, whatever you wanted it to do. And it will load after the mod pack, and you will be much happier because things will work better, generally speaking. I mean, that doesn't fix every problem you're going to run into, but it fixed this one. So now let's try that again. So that was an off-topic troubleshooting tip for me. So, might serve you in the future. But yeah, I mean, if I was you guys and I was just starting out and I didn't want to conflict with the mod pack, just try to start your stuff afterwards, name-wise. And you should be good. Or at least good, like, I would say probably about 80% of the time. Luther right. And we're going to go there, and it's going to ask me if I want to have an entry thing, and not that it matters because there's no entrances in cage matches. I should probably mod that out so it doesn't ask anymore, but I'm lazy, and it doesn't hurt anything, so... Okay. Are you kidding me? Did it freeze? Son of a, what is going on? That's where this comes in handy. Yeah, sure. Let's see why this thing is flipping out. Because it'll pop an error up here if it did error out. And it did. It's having problems with... the barbed wire boards. Let's turn those off. I don't need them on anyway. Mod pack for 2.0. Match. I need to fix that too, because that shouldn't have happened. Then we'll go back to main menu. Okay. Let's try this one more time. Yeah, this can be a slog if you have problems. Stupid thing. Okay. Ah, man, now that minimize is going to be there forever. And are you just going to have a shit fit still? Alright. This thing is being a pain in my ass, so let's try this again. I apologize. I did the other, I did the template file, and everything worked swimmingly, and everything was great. And then I went ahead and was like, all right, so this is going to work perfectly. And now that I'm trying it out, it's like, nope. So, okay. One last time before I get upset and just turn the mod pack off entirely. Well, I can't because we required it. Oh. Okay. So let's just hope that this works. Otherwise, I'm going to have to scrap this and figure out what the hell is going on. Okay, so we don't need any of that. Now, that should do that. That should be fine. There we go. I don't know what the hell that was about. Okay.
Fight.
So now, we're going to go and try to throw it. I got to turn that down. Why are you throwing him out of the ring, you jerk? And no explosion. You can hear the pop of him hitting the, the old barbed wire ropes, but there's no explosion there. And that's because we are not calling it on the correct anything. If you go back into our code now, and that is my template code. Let's go back into the cage explosion code, get rid of the properties that I had to do there. Yeah, we're just, this is not at all what we need. So we still need the player object that threw him in, but are we trying to trigger an explosion where the player was standing? And to F, in the Y position. So no, that is not what we're trying to do at all. We are actually looking for the player that is being thrown, not the guy who's doing the throwing. So there's an easy way to do that. So what we need to get is the PL object's target player. So to do that, we need the player manager, and it is an instanced class, so we're going to do the inst. And we need to get PL obj method of this, and that will just get us another player. So we're going to name this guy player PL obj2 equals, just like that. And then we're going to do PL obj dot target player IDX. So that will get whatever wrestler that's being targeted by the guy doing the throwing, which will be the guy getting thrown. So now we need the player object 2 position. We'll keep that at 2F. And the player object 2 position Y. And then we want to play them at the, there we go. So now this should do it at the location of the target player who's getting thrown into the cage. And now let's see if that decides to play the... So I'm so used to doing the mod pack that I instinctively go to the mod pack directory as soon as I've built. So we're going to want to go to our bin, our debug. We got our zcageexplode.dll. We're going to copy that. We're going to go back into managed and paste it in. Now, we haven't changed the hook, and we haven't changed the signature of the method, this part here, and we haven't changed the name. So we don't need to patch again. This can save you a lot of time if you're writing your own mods, unless you change the hook or change this line of a method that is hooked. You do not need to patch. So I'm going to go ahead and, now that we've copied it in, I'm going to run it again. And let's see if we get an explosion this time. I'm actually not 100% positive we will this time, but we might. There's still a couple of other things that probably need to be done. So we go to offline play, exhibition, cage match plus. We're going to go ahead and pick our wrestlers here. Sure, entry finished. It's going to ask me if I want I'm going to pick a wrestler without an entrance attire next time, because there's no reason for it. Let's turn the calm level down so they don't fight with me.
Fight!
And now let's go try throwing him into the... See, still, nothing. Now, we need... What we need to do is, if we go over to my tutorial, you'll see that here we have essentially the same exact thing, except that it adds some downtime, which I'll get to in a sec. We never even use that. So yeah, this just kind of does the exact same thing, and it didn't work. This was what I was showing you. You know, sometimes you'll have an idea and you just can't figure out why it doesn't work. So now let's do the one that does work. So I'm going to take this from my already done code. I'm going to copy it into my other thing, and then I'm going to explain it to you. Let's do that. Cage explosion. I'm going to get rid of this because it didn't work. So this is the exact same hook that we had written. It just doesn't... It doesn't have the same name or the same contents. So this is calling... You see that we're getting an error here with the explosion timer. Well, that's because this is calling a new class that we're going to create called explosion timer. And to create the explosion timer, you want to go to build, or not build. What am I talking about? I'm reading now. You go to add. You just go to class, and it's gonna open this up. You want to add a new class. You're going to call this class explosion timer, and then it will do this, and you'll get a new class. And this timer is an extension of another class. We're going to extend system.timers.timer. And so when you put this colon here and add another class, it extends that class, so it will be able to do everything that that initial class can do that's not hidden, and it can take in new information. So what we want to do is have it store the player object that is being thrown. That way when the timer is up, we know what player object that is being worked on. Then what we're going to want to do, we need to write what happens when this timer elapses. So when the countdown hits 0, we need to tell the timer what to do. So what we're going to do is create a public static void and explosion elapsed, we'll call it. And when you work on, so the elapsed thing of a timer is an event. So all events generally get two arguments passed in. One is an object, and that's going to be the sender, and that's just going to be the object that rose the event. And the other one is going to be the event arguments. So in this case, we have system.timers.timer elapsed. Right here, we have elapsed timer event args. And generally, those are called sender and E. And I just tend to continue that that trend. That's just traditionally what they're called, so I'm not going to fight with them about it. So remember what we did with the code that did not work? Let's see, this stuff right here. So if we come over to the explosion timer, I wrote 2. I'm going to use this one. And I'm going to go through this and explain it all. I just don't feel like typing it all up again, so don't worry too much about it. So what we're going to need is you're going to create, or you're going to cast the sender as an explosion timer, because you're going to need to stop it, and you're going to need some you're going to need to add your usings into here too, because it's a new class. Right now we really only need Unity Engine in here, so that's all I'm going to add. So yeah, so what you're going to need to do, you've got to take your object, which an object is literally like the base class for everything in C#. So everything extends from object. Everything is technically an object. So an object can be anything. But in order to access the more specific methods in that object, you have to tell C#, you have to tell the computer what kind of object it is. So we're going to reclass the sender as an explosion timer. So we do that by typing explosion timer equals sender as explosion timer, and that will reclass sender as an explosion timer with the name of timer. And then, of course, we stop the timer. Anytime you're dealing with a timer, and I use them moderately frequently. So if you're modding a game like this, it is something you probably will end up doing, because you don't have access to everything directly. So sometimes you need to delay something, and the best way to do that in the background is just to use a timer. So yeah. So when you use a timer, you always need to stop it in the ILSpy thing, because it will literally keep going. Like, it will keep ticking down even as this code runs, and then it will fire again when when it runs out. So you don't want that. You want to stop the timer. And then we need to get the position, because we needed that position to trigger the explosion, if you remember correctly. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the position. We used timer.pl object, which is the player that we're going to pass to the timer when we create it, .playerPosition.x, and then I use 3f, which is a little bit higher than the 2f, because if you look at the animation, he picks him up a little bit and throws him into the cage. So we don't want the explosion down by the ropes, we want it higher. So I went with an additional whole unit higher. When you're dealing with FirePro stuff, they're in floating point numbers, which is decimals. So there can be a fairly noticeable difference between, let's say, 2 and 2.5. So you don't always need to go in whole numbers. You should experiment with decimals because whole numbers may be way too much. But in this case, an entire whole number up seemed to work pretty well. And then we're using the position Y in the last part of that position. I literally got this from the code that calls the explosion. So let's look at that. It was in collision in ring, I believe. Yeah, it's literally right here. So I just cut and pasted it, and then changed this to 3f because I knew I needed it to be a little higher. So that's literally all I did. And that's how I got that position. So it's not like I did all kinds of crazy math or anything like that. It's just that I just cut and pasted because they had already figured it out. And then the next thing we need to do is, instead of calling that the match effect.play rope explosion, I took and I cut and pasted the if we go to the match effect class now and we look at that rope explosion code, match effect, play rope explosion, the reason that we weren't getting explosions is because the mod pack overrides this method. And it overrides it to the point where the default code will never run. So unless whatever specifically you have checked off in the mod pack, or you know, or whatever from the mod pack is true and will allow this method to fire, you will never see an explosion. So what I did is I took the default code, which is this here, everything after the mod pack stuff, and I cut and pasted it directly into our code. So now the explosion code will run no matter what. It's not dependent on calling that method. It just does what that method does inside your code. And that makes it much simpler to deal with when you have another conflict like that. And that's the conflict that I was talking about before we had all of the other errors, where I was like, I don't think it's going to play. Well, I knew it wasn't going to play because I knew I overrode that method. And so that method was saying it's the barbed wire baseball bat or rope explosion method, where it's saying unless you have this box checked, never play this match effect. And so that keeps it from playing the rope explosion if you don't have the rope explosion box checked. And so that's why we weren't getting any explosions. But this will avoid that. And one thing to keep in mind about cut and pasting code is that you're going to see thises in here. We've only got one of them, I believe, no, you got two. So when you get anything that says this, you're going to need to call the instance of the class that this is referencing. In this case, we are in the match effect class, and match effect, as you'll see in ILSpy, has an inst. So if you look at my code now, you'll notice that I have changed this.prefab explosion does not equal null, which is the original code here. If we go back down here, see this.prefab explosion does not equal null. You'll notice that in my code I have changed it to say matchEffect.inst.prefab explosion does not equal null. So that's what you need to do if you're going to cut and paste code. If you see a this, you need to make sure that you change the this to the instance of the class that you're referencing. I hope that's not too terribly confusing, and you'll see I did the same thing here. Where it said this.prefab explosion, I changed it to matchEffect.inst as well. And so now it will explode every time, regardless of what the mod pack settings are at. So the mod pack can work separately from your cage explosion mod. The mod pack will still not allow the ropes to explode unless the user wants it to. But if they have your mod loaded up, it will still allow the cage to explode. And so everything up to here is the code that I copied. So this is all the code that I copied, including this, I guess, too, but that came from a different spot. And then, of course, we have the sound effect that we copied from from where it calls the original play rope explosion effect. Remember, after that effect was played, it played the sound effect, because the sound effect isn't actually a part of the explosion animation or the explosion graphics effect. So you need to call that if you want it to also play the explosion. And you could actually change this. I know that the barbed wire ropes has like the kind of pop, and you may want it to sound like the barbed wire board explosion, like when you get thrown out of the ring in the barbed wire board match, which is a totally different sound than the ropes. If you wanted to do that, you just change this match.se or the match se enum, and you'll find the one that you want. And I don't know exactly which one is the explosion out of the ring, so we can try to find it maybe, just to show you that it can be done. I don't know where it is. you can find it if you really wanted to. I'm just going to leave it at the original thing unless I can find it real quick. Maybe it's up higher. No. Yeah, I don't know exactly which one it is, so I'm going to go ahead and say, to hell with it, I will leave it the way I had it. You can find it if you want. I can show you how to find it. I guess if I'm going to show you how to find it, it kind of... we might as well do it, huh? So we're going to go to Mind Play. We're already in the Match Effects class. So Play Mine Explosion is what's going to happen if you get thrown out of the ring. I mean, that's pretty obvious. So what you're going to want to do to find where it's called is you go to Analyze, you right-click it, Analyze, and then say Used By, and it's going to bring up every place that calls that method. And you're going to find, so the mod pack calls it twice, and then the player transit state after animation down calls it. So we'll click there, and that'll bring up that particular method, and then we'll just search for it. So we go Play Mine Explosion. So there we go. We have it now. We know that it is the match se-enum.bakudan. So we can go change it if we want to now, just for the hell of it. Why not? There we go. Bakudan. So now it will play the out of the ring explosion, which is a louder, more bodied explosion than the little pop that happens when you get thrown into the ropes. And then going on from there, I decided that, so when you get thrown into the cage, it doesn't add any extra downtime. And I thought that that was stupid, especially if the cage is going to explode. If the cage explodes, you want to add some downtime, because otherwise they get right back up most of the time, because an Irish whip doesn't add any downtime. So basically, neither of those things added any downtime to the player. The initial Irish whip as a move, and then the fact that the game said, oh, you're close enough to the cage, let's slam him into the cage instead. But for some reason, Spike didn't think to add downtime to that occurrence. So I added some downtime. To do that, what I wanted to do was I wanted it to be random between 1 minute or 1 second and 3 seconds of downtime added. So I just called the unityengine.random.range for 60 or 180. Technically, that should be 181 because it's non-inclusive of the last number. So 60 to 181, and then I just used the player object.add downtime to the timer's player object and added that to it. And then finally, in this method, what you're going to want to do is dispose the player. So or dispose the timer. So what timers, once you stop them, they stay in memory. You can start them again. We don't want that. We want, after the timer has expired once, it's done. It's done what it needs to do. It doesn't need to exist in memory anymore. And dispose will get rid of the timer from memory, so it will clear that memory. So you want to use timer.dispose. So now that that is done, let's show you the class over here. So, did I not make the PL object? Oh, I did not. So you're going to want to make this public. So your explosion timer should have a public player PL object. That's why I was getting the red thing here. So what you're going to want to do is, I'm going to rename this to PL object again, just because I can. I like that better. Okay, so now that's better, and it's back to where it was before I got rid of everything and told you to start up on this method. So in the main cage explodes method now, what we're going to want to do is create a new explosion timer, which we do here by saying explosion timer with the lowercase e equals new explosion timer. That creates a new instance of the explosion timer. And then we set the explosion timer's PL object to be playerman.inst.getPlayerObject for the PL object's target player index. Remember, like we did before, where it was the guy being thrown, not the guy doing the throwing. So now the explosion timer holds the information, the player information, for the guy being thrown. And that's what that'll do. And then we need to set an interval, which is how much time needs to elapse before the timer raises the elapsed event. And this is in milliseconds, so 1,000 equals 1 second. So I did half a second, and that seemed to work for me. When you're fucking with timers, you really just need to pick something that makes sense and then adjust based on testing. There's no, half a second in this worked fine, but it may have been a second and a half. It may have been a quarter of a second. Who knows? You just kind of have to pick something and test it and go with it from there. And then we need to add that elapsed thing to the elapsed event. So I'm going to go back to the explosion timer, and we called it explosion elapsed. So in my test code it was different, but only different in the sense that I had a lowercase e there instead of an uppercase e. But that's fixed. So when you add something to the elapsed event, you need to type in explosion timer.elapsed plus equals. That means add it to the existing value instead of replacing the value. And then your explosion elapsed, or explosion timer.explosion elapsed method, which we wrote over here, that's the one that actually makes the thing explode. And then you want to start the timer. I super often forget to do this, and I'm like, why isn't it working? It should work. And it turns out that it's just because I forgot to start the timer. So always make sure to include the start. So in this case, it would be explosion timer.start. And that's pretty much it. So now we have a timed explosion that will happen no matter what the mod pack settings are, because we copy and pasted the actual explosion code instead of relying on the game to do it for us, which allows through its methods, which is at the mercy of other modders overwriting it. If you can get away with it, then awesome, use their code. But it's not going, I don't want you to shy away from just copying the code into your code, because it's the same amount of code that's going to be run, and sometimes it can be more beneficial because then you'll be able to modify this a little bit if you needed to. The one thing I will caution you against is do not copy code that happens after your method has run. I've seen a couple of people who I've helped out with mods during the last tutorial series do this for some reason, where they will copy code into their method that happens after their code runs. So essentially it runs twice, and that is inefficient. It's not really going to hurt anything, because after your code runs, all of that other stuff is going to run anyway with the default values. So, but you're essentially running a bunch of code twice, and one time for no reason. So don't do that. But if you, so we're never going to call the code in matchEffects.instance.play rope explosion if we're just going to copy that out. So if we just copy it out and don't call that method, then the code is only being run once. So it makes perfect sense and is perfectly viable to just copy it into your code. And that way, like I said, you can modify it slightly if you need to. In this case, we didn't need to, but if you did need to, you could. And it's only going to run once. So, just be wary about copying stuff that happens after your method runs. But don't worry about copying stuff from other methods that you could have called but decided not to in lieu of copying their code. Okay, so now let's try this one last time, and I'm pretty sure this is going to work. So here we go. We're going to go to our repos. We're going to go to Cage Explosion. We're going to go to Bin. We're going to go to Debug. And we're going to go to Z Cage Explodes. And we're going to copy it into Managed. And we're going to paste it into here. And it's going to ask us if we want to overwrite. We do. And we also, we changed, or I changed a bunch of stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and repatch. I can't remember if I changed anything that absolutely needs to be repatched, but I'm going to repatch just in case. It can't ever hurt to repatch. It's just not always necessary. When you're testing mods, always instruct the users of your mods to repatch. Always. Because who knows what kind of crazy shit those people get up to. So yeah, just because I'm telling you that you don't always have to repatch when you're testing your own mods, you always have to repatch if you're dealing with the mod pack. If you release an update, repatch, even if, because you don't know what I've changed. So yeah, always repatch other people's mods. But if you know what you're changing, you don't always have to repatch. So let's do this. I'm going to pick a wrestler without an entrance costume this time, so that I don't have to skip that pop-up, because it just takes time. Here we go. Offline play, exhibition, cage match plus. Now we want to go, I'll pick Buddy York, and I will beat up Luther Wright. Technically they're both faces, so that's kind of shitty for 1977, which is where my Fed is based, but whatever. It's for testing purposes, so what? It doesn't even matter. Change that down to comm level 1.
Fight!
And we'll walk over here. And boom! He explodes. Let's test it on all 4 sides. He explodes there. We'll come down here. Explodes there. Then we'll come over here. All 4 of them explode correctly. So there you go. The cage explodes. Now, so that's pretty much it for this basic part of this tutorial. We have an exploding cage now. You learn to work with timers to make things happen slightly afterwards. If we didn't have that timer in there, what would have ended up happening was, as soon as the animation was triggered, the explosion would have happened. So the explosion literally would have happened where the wrestler was standing when the animation started. So where they were being Irish whipped from. By delaying it just that half a second, it makes it explode near the cage, near where their head and arms hit the cage. So that is why you might want to use timers. And so the other reason you might want to use timers is if you're dealing with the workshop. But I may do a tutorial on the mod packs workshop uploader, and how to write a simple downloader. But it will be a simple one. It will not be a timer one. So, or not even a downloader. I will tell you how to do a simple installer for the default download. And for the mod packs, install all item or install subscribed items downloads. But I am not going to teach you how to write something that downloads files from the workshop. That's just not within the scope of this. But if you do ever get into that, like if you get into modding well enough that you feel comfortable enough to do that, and it took me several years before I really messed around with workshop stuff, and now I'm moderately comfortable with it. It's still a bit confusing for me, especially since a lot of it is hidden, and I can't really access a lot of it because Spike only used certain things from the workshop. But yeah, so that would be, it comes in handy there. It comes in handy for resetting values. I use it when I need to turn off rope breaks for a top rope move. So, you reset the rope break for 4 or 5 seconds after the top rope move happens. You turn off rope breaks when the move happens, and then you turn it back on 5 seconds later. And, 2 pinfalls are not going to happen within the span of 5 seconds, generally speaking. So you end up with what essentially is turning off rope breaks for the one top rope move, but not other moves. So they do come in handy quite a bit. So it was good to teach you how to work with them. I taught you how to inherit a timer and be able to add other things to it with the player object that we added to the timer so that the timer could keep track of that without having to store it somewhere in like some static field in your mod or something, because that is never fun. The mod pack does that a lot because I just wasn't super comfortable with how everything worked when I first started programming the mod pack, and I picked up some bad habits, and luckily I've kind of broken a lot of them, but there's still a lot of old programming habits in the mod pack that I want to teach you guys not to do. So this is a much cleaner and nicer way to handle things like storing data for your new classes or whatever, but still relying on an older class. Yeah, so there was that. We taught you a little bit about how to troubleshoot problems that might arise, even though some of them were not expected. Some of them were expected, like the lack of an explosion that the first time we got it working. I knew that was going to happen, but the fact that the mod pack and this mod flipped out on one another was totally unexpected. Because my old one worked for whatever reason. I think it might have been called something different. So, but yeah. So that's pretty much it for this tutorial. Next tutorial, I think I'm going to get into creating forms. So maybe we'll have an option to check if you want your cage to explode. Maybe we'll have we'll give you some options to set for downtime, like the minimum and maximum range, so that you're not stuck. If users think 3 seconds is too much or too little, they can adjust it. But yeah, we'll go with stuff like that. But that'll be in the next tutorial. So that is what you can look forward to, is forms and user options through the PWGR window and forms for your mod pack. I'll get into how to format them and how to read from them and all kinds of stuff like that. The null checks that you'll need to make sure that you don't crash people's games, etc. But yeah, so we'll do that next time, and hopefully somebody will put this code together and release it, because like my tutorials from the last series that I did way back in like 2017 or early 2018, I am not going to release these mods. It's up to someone else from the community to put this together into a mod and release it for you guys to use. I won't be doing it. It won't be a part of the mod pack. So you guys knock yourselves out. You can take all the credit. You don't have to credit me. Add your own spin to it. You can make the cage cause bleeding or a possibility of bleeding if you want. Go nuts with it. Try to figure some stuff out on your own. Do your own thing. But yeah, so that's kind of where we're at with these, and I will see you the next time when we'll be talking about forms and user options.